Death doesn't feel like a monster in the room, not anymore. It's more like a quiet curtain drawing across a day that's had a good run. I can still hear the dogs bark from a set that smelled of timber and lights. And I can still see a silver ship humming in a studio night that pretended to be space. I wasn't perfect, never tried to be. I just kept showing up and holding a family together the way the script asked, and sometimes the way life did too. If there's a last thing to say, it's thank you for the letters, the laughs, the patience when the camera missed and we had to try again. If this is my last bit of stage light, let it fall softly on the faces who grew up with me and kept me company when the house got quiet. That is how many of us remember June Lockhart. Yeah, the mum who kept calm while Lassie saved the day, the steady heart in Lost in Space, the woman with the poised smile and a spine of steel under the cardigan. She was old-school Hollywood without the fuss, graceful and game, a working actor who carried 2 eras of television on her shoulders and still had time to pop back in for cheeky cameos and reunions. Look, if her story has ever sat with you on a Sunday arvo, if you've ever felt that warm, safe feeling of a TV home when your own felt a bit wobbly, toss a thought below. And if you want more stories told this way, give this a gentle nod with a like and stick around. Because behind the tidy living rooms and the clean endings, there was a person who took risks, loved the craft, and quietly nudged a generation toward curiosity, even about the stars. The thing about June is that she wasn't just an on-screen mother. She was a touchstone in lounge rooms across the country, the kind of presence that made chaos feel manageable for half an hour each week. And there's a little twist most folks miss. A thread that runs from a Christmas set in the 30s to a medal pinned on decades later, for inspiring everyday people to look up and wonder. That's the road we're walking tonight. Steady steps, a few surprises, and the kind of truth that lands soft but stays. Ready to see where it really began, and why the image of the perfect mom was never the whole story. She was born into it, you know, show business. Some kids grow up with backyards, she grew up with backstages. June Lockhart came into the world in the middle of winter, in New York City, with spotlights practically waiting for her. Her parents, Jean and Kathleen Lockhart, were both actors of the old guard, proper, trained, and full of that theater blood that never really cools. They didn't just teach her lines, they taught her how to listen to silence, how to stand still and make the room move instead. Her first time on film, she wasn't even out of school yet. A Christmas Carol, 1938. Imagine that, stepping onto a set with your mom and dad, and your first audience is an entire generation whole one day call it a classic. She never made a fuss about it, never bragged, just smiled that half smile of hers and said, "I got lucky early." But it wasn't luck, it was craft and timing, and a kind of gentle persistence that the old studios used to reward. Broadway called soon after, and she walked on stage like she'd been doing it her whole life, which, honestly, she had. For Love or Money in 1948 earned her a Tony, a shiny thing that said Most Promising Newcomer. She'd laugh about that later, calling it the longest-running promise of my career. But that's the thing with June. She didn't chase fame. She built longevity, brick by brick, script by script. While other actors jumped between contracts and scandals, she kept showing up, week after week, learning her lines, holding her ground. When television started changing the world, she slipped right into it like a natural. Lassie came along in the 1950 seconds, and June became the nation's mom almost overnight. That series wasn't just a show about a heroic dog, it was comfort food for post-war America, and her calm voice, her way of listening before speaking, made the whole thing feel like a safe place to land. Kids who watched Lassie back then still remember the way she'd crouch down to talk to Timmy, never talking down to him, just talking, eye to eye. That's rare, even now. Off-screen, though, June wasn't all soft edges and motherly sighs. She had a restless streak. Between shoots, she'd head to air shows, drive fast cars, talk space exploration with scientists before it was cool. She'd later say she fell in love with the idea of other worlds, and that's probably why Lost in Space fit her so well. By the time the 1,960 seconds rolled around, she wasn't just the mother of Timmy and Lassie, she was Maureen Robinson, holding a family together somewhere between the stars. And honestly, she did it with the same quiet authority that made you believe anything could survive if she was there. People forget how revolutionary that was. A woman in command, on TV. In an age when the world still thought space was a man's game, June didn't push. She just existed in that role so naturally that it felt right. That's power. The subtle kind that shifts culture without raising its voice. NASA noticed too. Decades later, when she was long retired, they gave her a medal for inspiring public curiosity in science and space. She chuckled, said she'd just been pretending. But millions of kids grew up chasing the stars because she made the unknown feel like home, and that's what made her different. She didn't live through fame, she lived through work. No scandals, no headlines, just decades of steady performances and quiet courage. A rare breed, honestly. In an industry that eats its young, she made it to 100 with grace intact, her humor dry, her wit sharp, her heart still open to every new story that came her way. There's a rhythm to lives like that. Not the flashy up-and-down kind, but a gentle hum that never stops. June Lockhart carried that hum all the way from Broadway lights to a quiet room in California, where, I like to think, she looked out at the night sky one last time and smiled. By the time Lost in Space wrapped its final season, June Lockhart had already become something of a television landmark. She wasn't just another face in a lineup of actors from the golden age. She was a bridge between the theater grace of her parents' generation and the brave new world of television that was reshaping families. You have to picture it. The late 60s, color TV just finding its way into suburban homes, kids sprawled on shag carpets, and there she was, Maureen Robinson, calm, witty, the quiet pulse of a family adrift among the stars. There was something oddly grounding about her presence. Even when the special effects were charmingly cheap, she made you believe it all mattered. That's what made her magic. She made fiction feel like comfort, like truth softened by kindness. But after Lost in Space, things didn't stop. Most actors fade a little. When a defining role ends, she didn't. She pivoted, gracefully, into guest spots, stage revivals, even sitcoms. She turned up in Petticoat Junction, The Drew Carey Show, step-by-step small cameos that fans caught with a grin and a bit of nostalgia. She wasn't chasing relevance, she was maintaining connection. It's a quiet art, that kind. She knew exactly who she was, and that certainty showed in everything she did. The audience could feel it. Even when she popped up in quirky science fiction conventions decades later, wearing that same open smile, you could tell she wasn't doing it for applause. She was there because she loved people, and maybe, deep down, she missed the hum of the set. You see, the strange thing about someone like June Lockhart is that she never entirely left the screen. She became part of the cultural wallpaper. You could be flipping channels, land on some black and white rerun, and there she'd be the voice, the poise, the warmth. And yet behind that steadiness, there was a woman who never stopped learning. Her friends would talk about her fascination with space, not as a gimmick, but as a genuine curiosity. After all, she was a regular guest at JPL events in Pasadena. Engineers and scientists would come up to her, wide-eyed, thanking her for sparking their interest when they were children. Can you imagine that? A TV mom, indirectly helping to launch real spacecraft decades later. That curiosity, that endless spark, was her secret fuel. She'd talk about attending launches, about sitting in mission control as rockets pierced the sky. One NASA official once joked that she could run a briefing herself, and honestly, I don't doubt it. Her mind was sharp, restless, and surprisingly modern. Even in her 90s, she was keeping up with technology, messaging her grandkids, checking news on her tablet, asking about Mars landers. Not because she needed to stay relevant, but because she genuinely cared. And when she wasn't looking at the stars, she was looking inward. Those who visited her later in life say she was philosophical, never bitter, never clinging to fame. She'd say things like, "It's a long run, but that's the gift you get to see what really lasts." And what lasted, for her, was gratitude. The fans, the stories, the simple privilege of having worked for almost 8 decades doing something she loved. She was humble about it, maybe too humble for today's standards. She didn't tweet her thoughts or chase headlines. She just lived them, quietly, consistently. There's this story, small but telling, from one of her last public appearances. She was at a fan event in Los Angeles, sitting under a soft light, signing photos from Lassie. A young woman came up, nervous, holding a photo that had clearly been passed down. She said her grandmother used to watch Lassie every afternoon, and that show had kept her company through rough times. June listened, really listened, and then she said softly, "Well, that makes us family then, doesn't it?" That's the sort of kindness you can't fake. It wasn't performance. It was muscle memory. She'd spent her life connecting through the screen, and here she was, still doing it heart to heart. In an industry known for reinvention, she found peace in consistency. Her beauty never screamed. It glowed quietly. Her fame didn't roar. It hummed through generations. And when the cameras finally stopped rolling for good, there wasn't some tragic fall or scandalous fade, just a soft dimming, like a lamp gently turned down at the end of a long night. People talk about Hollywood legends, but few of them age with dignity still intact. June Lockhart did. She also never stopped championing others. She'd show up at events to honor her peers, even those younger than her, often speaking about how television wasn't just entertainment, but a record of hope. She believed every show left a fingerprint on someone's life. That's how she looked at her own career, not as fame but as service. She once said, "If you make one person feel a little less lonely, that's worth a lifetime." Maybe that's why she lived so long, honestly. There was no bitterness to weigh her down. She carried only gratitude, humor, and a quiet curiosity that never left her eyes. When people close to her were asked how she spent her last months, they said she still got excited about sunsets. Imagine that, a woman who had seen the inside of every studio light, still finding awe in the natural ones outside her window. That's something pure. Something that can't be taught. June Lockhart wasn't just a performer, she was a keeper of calm, a soft-spoken revolutionary, and a mirror to what grace under pressure really looks like. Maybe that's why, even now, so many feel like they've lost someone from their own family. Because for years, she sat with us in our living rooms, made us laugh, made us hope, and without ever saying so, reminded us how good it feels to simply care. There's something deeply human about how she moved through her later years. No grand declarations, no tearful farewells, just small moments stitched together like quiet prayers. After all, June Lockhart had spent most of her life being everyone's mother on screen, in public, even to her co-stars. But when the lights dimmed, when the work slowed, she learned how to be something she'd never really had time for before. Just June. The woman behind the poise, the laughter, and the graceful posture that television engraved into memory. She lived alone for a while, in a little house full of sunlight and books, the walls lined with framed memories that spanned nearly a century. A Christmas Carol, Lassie, Lost in Space. It was all there, in black and white and color, stacked like layers of time. Visitors said she still had that spark, still curious, still playful. She'd laugh easily, tease whoever came by, offer tea like she was hosting one more family episode. She once said, almost offhandedly, that the hardest thing about living that long is watching everyone else's credits roll before yours. And yet she didn't say it with sadness. It was more like she understood the rhythm of it all. People came and went, but the work remained. The art remained. She was the last in a long chain of performers who'd carried something old-fashioned into the modern age: respect for the craft, care for the audience, and a sense of duty that didn't depend on fame. Every now and then, she'd still get fan mail. Handwritten, can you believe it? Kids from the 50s who were now grandparents, thanking her for being part of their childhoods. She read every one, or at least tried to, sometimes replying with a short note if her hands weren't too shaky that day. It mattered to her connection, that invisible thread between strangers who'd never met but somehow shared years of laughter and comfort through a glowing screen. That was the kind of fame she believed in, not the noisy, fleeting kind. Her daughter, Anne, often visited, and together they'd reminisce about the old studio lots, about Jean and Kathleen, about how the Lockharts had somehow kept the magic alive through 3 generations. Anne once said, "Mum never taught me how to act. She taught me how to stay human while doing it." That line stayed with people who knew her because it was exactly who June was. She didn't perform humanity, she lived it. Even when the spotlight dimmed, she kept the same tone, the same warmth, no bitterness, no complaints about how things used to be. She'd simply say, "Every era gets its magic. Ours just wore nicer suits." When the pandemic hit and the world went quiet, June stayed home, watched the news, worried like everyone else, but she also rediscovered peace in silence. Old friends called in on video chats, old shows replayed on cable. She'd watch herself in those reruns sometimes, not out of vanity but curiosity. "I still remember that scene," she'd chuckle. "I tripped right before they yelled action." There was humility in the way she remembered. No exaggeration, no pretending it had been all glamour, just work, just life. And then, when travel opened up again, she surprised everyone. She went to a small NASA event, frail but glowing, her silver hair perfectly combed. They presented her once more as the woman who brought space into the living room. She gave a short speech, no script, just spoke from her heart. She said, "I think we all belong to something much bigger than ourselves. I was lucky enough to pretend that once, and somehow it became real." The room stood still for a moment. Even the scientists, used to numbers and engines, felt it. Because in her voice, there was no performance, just gratitude. That was her last public appearance. After that, she retreated into her quiet world again. Her days were simple breakfast by the window, a short walk when the sun wasn't too harsh, reading old novels, sometimes answering the phone with that same calm hello fans knew from decades ago. She had outlived most of her peers, but she never sounded lonely. People who visited said she still spoke as if she had plans. She'd talk about new discoveries, about documentaries she'd seen, about how the world kept changing and how beautiful that was. In her final months, she was surrounded by family. Her laughter, they said, was still soft but full, the kind that fills a room gently. There was no fear, no regret, just a woman at peace with a life well lived. She'd often hummed to herself, tunes from the 40s, and once she joked, "If had enough curtain calls to last a few lifetimes." That was June, funny, grounded, graceful, until the end. When the news came that she'd passed, it wasn't shock that rippled through people, it was gratitude. A collective exhale, like the closing of a chapter that had been open for nearly 100 years. Fans flooded social media with photos, old clips, memories of afternoons spent with Lassie and the Robinsons. There wasn't sorrow so much as affection, a sense that she'd given more than enough, and maybe she deserved that quiet rest at last. And somewhere out there, under the same stars she once looked up to with wonder, her voice still echoes through reruns and archives, steady, kind, and full of grace. For many, June Lockhart didn't just play a mother. She taught us what tenderness looked like when the world was uncertain. She reminded us that courage doesn't need to shout sometimes, it just needs to stay. When people talk about legacy, they often think of awards, headlines, or statues. But with June Lockhart, it's different. Her legacy isn't something you hang on a wall. It's something you feel. It's that sense of calm that sneaks into your chest when you hear her voice again on an old rerun. It's that strange familiarity when you see her standing in a black and white frame, smiling like she knows you've had a long day. Her presence became part of the emotional fabric of generations, not loud, not demanding, but always there. That's the rare kind of immortality actors dream about, though I don't think she ever called it that. She'd just say, if they remember, that's nice. If they don't, I had a wonderful time anyway. That sort of humility is almost extinct in show business. You can still visit her stars on Hollywood Boulevard, one for film and one for television. Tourists walk over them every day, most not realizing how much light those few brass letters once gave to the world. But the funny thing about symbols is that they live on long after we stop looking. Somewhere, a grandmother is showing Lassie to her grandchild, explaining that once upon a time, stories were simpler and kindness was the main plot. Somewhere else, a young scientist is remembering the first time Lost in Space made them curious about galaxies. That's June's true footprint, quiet ripples, still spreading. Her daughter Anne keeps her mother's laughter alive in interviews, and fans online swap clips and trivia like small treasures. It's not nostalgia, exactly, it's gratitude. Because for nearly a century, June reminded people that gentleness could be strong, that warmth could carry weight, that doing your job well, with grace, was its own kind of rebellion. She never had to reinvent herself to stay relevant. The world just kept finding her again. There's a lesson in that, maybe one we've forgotten, that you don't have to burn bright to leave light behind. Sometimes it's enough to be steady, to keep showing up, to care. June Lockhart showed us that, both on Earth and among the stars. And as her story settles into history, it feels less like an ending and more like a soft continuation, every rerun, every new viewer discovering her, every quiet smile sparked by the memory of her voice. That's not goodbye. That's just her way of staying. Even now, it's strange how her presence lingers, not like a ghost, not like a shadow, but like a gentle hum beneath the noise of everything else. You'll be scrolling through some late-night channel, and there she is again, that familiar tilt of the head, that knowing pause before a line. It doesn't matter if it's Lassie or Lost in Space, black and white or color, she feels timeless. Maybe that's because she never tried to be anyone but herself. June Lockhart didn't chase fame. She built trust. She didn't perform motherhood. She embodied it, not through perfection but through patience. That's what made people love her. She was real when the world around her was pretending. And maybe that's why, all these years later, she still matters. In a world that moves too fast, where everything's loud and shiny, her calm feels almost rebellious. Watching her again is like stepping into a slower rhythm, a reminder that decency still has weight, that grace still counts for something. Younger generations discovering her work might not know her name at first, but they'll feel it, that quiet steadiness, that warmth. It's the kind of energy that doesn't age. If you think about it, her career was never about stardom. It was about belonging. She gave audiences something they didn't even know they needed: a safe place, a familiar tone, a soft landing after a hard day. Even in the wild frontier of space, she brought humanity with her. She made science fiction feel like home. That's the trick of great acting, you forget it's acting. So, when people say she was the heart of an era, they're not just being sentimental. They're recognizing someone who stitched her spirit into the fabric of our culture without ever demanding the spotlight. She was proof that you don't need noise to make an impact. Sometimes it's the quiet voices that last the longest. And maybe, somewhere out there, in the glow of some distant screen, a child will still hear her say, "Everything's going to be all right," and believe it just for a moment. That's her gift. That's her echo.